Okay, thank you, Caitlin. So we've kicked off the recording. Just to briefly introduce myself. So my background is too many years. I've just had a big birthday in corporate learning and development roles. I'm a chartered psychologist as well, so I am sadly interested in lots of things to do with people, really overly sadly interested, I think. My day job is CEO of Actus Performance Talent and Learning Software. I'll mention briefly what that is so that you do know what I do for a day job. But many of you might have come across me through the HR Uprising podcast, which I've been running for a couple of years. Again, that's got a huge range of topics on there, mainly aimed at people professionals, but there are some really useful manager series in there, so it does have more general applicability. All the links are here, so if you want to look into more about the back catalogue of that, you can find that very easily. So moving on, just mentioning what Actus is about. So if you haven't come across Actus, we offer performance, talent and learning management software, but we don't just offer the software, we also support with aligned training and consultancy. So we have people who just use our software, people who just do our training, and people who do a mixture of all of those. In terms of the training and consultancy we offer, and I'll mention this again later just to share, because we've got a special offer with our Actus Academy. So we have Actus Academy, that is ideal for SMEs, people who haven't got their own LMS platform, where you want to provide people with some training. So that's an on-demand e-learning platform which you can just sign into when you've used it. You don't have to go to a rolling contract. Equally, if you've got your own LMS, we have e-learning content that we can provide. And our two main training programs we run: Virtual Change Superhero, the next one kicks off in November, and our hybrid open management training course. I think the next date for that is actually January, because we've just kicked one off. So that's what we do. In terms of this session, the focus is in on teams, really, diverse and inclusive teams. And some of you will have come across the theories, I'm sure, of this. I'm going to be going back to some theories that I've been aware of 20, 30 years, but maybe with a bit of a diversity and inclusion angle on them, and hopefully will provide with a little bit more food for thought. So we'll look at the principles of building effective teams, whether you are overseeing it in your organisation from a people professional hat, or whether you are building a team or part of a team. And we'll also look at Belbin's team roles, Lencioni's dysfunctions of a team, and just some top tips for setting up inclusive and diverse teams and making them effective. Good old Ken Blanchard, there's a couple of quotes here, which he talks, I like his quote here, which is that none of us is as smart as all of us. And that's a great mantra for just generally. I mean, Ken Blanchard is a leadership guru who's probably been, I think I read his books 35 years ago. He did things like The 1 Minute Manager, Who Moved My Cheese. He's this guy about situational leadership. And the reality is that effective teams, as we'll look at this, are about being quite diverse. And it's about allowing ourselves to bring in all those different talents and strengths from people in order to make sure that we're as effective as we can be. And the same could be said for an organisation, all right? It's about thinking broadly as opposed to thinking vanilla. And so with that in mind, I thought I'd ask you first, get you thinking about this. What do you consider when you're building a team? If you were putting a team together on behalf of your organisation, what sort of things would you say are typically considered? And I'm going to put this up as a poll that you can actually choose more than one response that's relevant. I don't see what you're saying, so don't worry. It's just, this is just for an indication, so hopefully you can see it. And this reminds me of when I was back, I worked at Siemens. So really, when we built teams, you'd basically think about what people's technical knowledge was or technical ability, and that was probably the main thing that teams were built on. Maybe it was to do with their job role, but things about whether they thought about people's availability, because I don't think we did think about that much, because quite often you'd end up with the same people on the same project teams, and that would actually cause a problem in itself. We very rarely thought about whether people would get on together, or their personality, or their different preferences. And I don't actually think, it is now 12 years since I was full-time in an organisation, in a corporate organisation. I don't really think that diversity was a particular thing then, whether you were thinking about racial, gender diversity, or personality, or any kind of diversity. I just don't think it was really on the radar for the businesses I worked in. So curious, what do you think in terms of putting a team together? You've all answered, well done. I'm going to end the poll. Oh, hang on, that's it, not quite all. There's actually, I'm looking at the wrong thing. If you still want to go, you could another three or 4 seconds to choose it. You can choose more than one if you want, and I'll share the poll. It strikes me that you guys are more aware than we were when I was doing this. So although still the number one reason or the number thing you look at is technical ability or knowledge, followed what you're also saying is you would take into account personality, which is interesting. So yeah, tell me more about that. So if you were thinking about personality, is that about people who get on together, or is it about a mix? What sort of things do you think about if you're considering that, and diversity? So interesting that you guys are already thinking more broadly if you're pulling teams together. So do tell me in the chat what you're thinking about that. So if we were thinking, obviously the purpose of teams, it is about this idea that all of us are smarter than just working as individuals. If we're collaborative, then a high performing team, how we might define that? Well, this was a definition that I think is a nice one, really, where we talk about a small group of people who are so committed to something that's larger than themselves that they will not be denied. So it's really about people who are so committed on an outcome. Yet we've all been part of teams which are apathetic, haven't we? That really maybe weren't committed to achieving things, maybe been quite ineffective. And so what's the difference, I guess? And how do we, as a result of this webinar, think about making sure that the teams that we're operating with are set up to be high performing? I'm going to have a little look here of what you said. So you guys have been thinking about people with different personalities. You want a balance, as Valine, of introvert and extrovert. Yes, that's an interesting one, isn't it? Making sure that if you've just got a couple of real experts, introverts, that they're not so dominated by the other members and they get heard. And some of that's about the way in which the team is managed. Okay, and then Jem's saying it's not just about people, how well they get on. No, because actually people who get on well together may well actually almost comfort zone. That's sometimes a bad style, isn't it? It's an interesting one to be aware of, because if you get on well together, it may well be that you have great similarity of personality, for example. You have lots in common, and that can mean that you're less likely to challenge each other. So you're less diverse. Jen likes to think about the style of the organisation or team or project and the comfort level of the candidate in performing with that style. Okay, that's a really good one there. So you're saying that if you've got a company going through change, you're putting a change team together, then you might not need somebody who is really like stability and process. Interestingly, with change, when I talk about change, I think you're right, Jen, but I do think that sometimes you can get the change agents at the start, and we'll look at that in one of the slides later. That's quite useful. The people who are oriented towards change and don't mind what's the word, ambiguity, but later on you actually want people who are stability to embed change potentially. So it's maybe bringing those personalities in at the right time. Definitely agree, Stefano. Good teams involve a mix of several different personality types. So if you're pretty self-aware, it seems, about personality types. I haven't put a massive list up here, but I was intrigued as to, do you actually, if you were setting up a team, would you formally assess personality or not? Interested in that. And if you have, which personality tools might you use typically? So I'll just put that up for you. Let's see what you think. And if I've not included the one that you like to use, then tell us in the chat. And you can use more than one as well. Now, of course, you don't have to use a personality tool. Quest, haven't come across that one, Anisha. You don't have to use a personality tool. This is just, I suppose, out of curiosity, and these are popular ones that I've put up here. I have found, however, if I am setting up a new team, having some kind of personality conversation can be really useful. And I'll explain more about that. Valine says, I've used McCaig at work, but like Belbin and MBTI. So you use assessment for development tend to be, yep. I wouldn't use Belbin or MBTI for recruitment either. Myers-Briggs says later. So just from a point of view of recruitment into an organization, you've got to be very, very careful as to what tools you use. And none of those, with possible exception of StrengthsFinder, if you use the right one, you would use for recruitment, because yeah, I wouldn't recommend it unless you were perhaps doing it as part of an overall tool. But there are better tools, I think, for recruitment. But really simple tools like these can be quite useful for teams. And I almost think the simpler, the better, just because the purpose of it is to help everyone identify that within a team, even when there's 4 or 5 of us, we're not all exactly the same. And that's absolutely fine. Recognizing that we're different. Sometimes you can have people say, oh, you're different, and that's a bad thing. But when you realize that actually working with someone else who's different, that could mean that they like to do the things you don't like to do, then actually it's a great thing. And they're probably better at those things as well. So they're just these sort of tools when you are setting up a team. If you don't have to have, it doesn't have to be a high cost one. I don't have a massive preference for these. Personally, where I've used tools, I have used Belbin. I've used the color ones, one of the, whether it's Disc Insights or the old fashioned social styles that you can use, which is pretty much free. Those are really simple, good for communication styles. I have used Myers-Briggs for team building. Personally, I find it a bit too complicated for team building. I like it better for coaching. I say the same for FireB. Strengths Finder, I think that's quite good individually as well, potentially. So probably if I was going to say do something simple for setting up a team, I would probably use one of those two, the Belbin ones. Thank you there. So people are dropping things in there in terms of suggestions. Thanks, Stefano. So I'll stick with Belbin as an example. And the only reason I am referring to Belbin is that it is actually aimed specifically at team roles. So Meredith Belbin, who is about 94, lives over in Cambridge and is still alive, in the 60s came up with this theory of team roles. And his theory was that actually you need to have different, well, we need to all take roles. So it's actually not pure personality. Now, we all have preferences, but you're saying you need different roles at different stages of a team, which makes total sense when you think about it. And we all, as individuals, we're not just one of these. He said most of us would be able to comfortably take on 2 or 3 different roles. But what we need to do is have the awareness as to when we use those. So it's almost like putting that role on that stage of the actual project. And as soon as we have self-awareness, from my mind, whether it's this or whether it's personality, then I think we can be more effective as teams, because it means people are more self-aware as to the part that they need to play in contributing or developing that particular project. So he divided the roles. He started out with 8 roles and added in specialist, which is basically the technical roles. So it's not so much about personality preference, it's more about your technical aspect. The specialist might be brought in, you might have I don't know, a web design specialist or an IT specialist in a certain project that comes in for certain bits and then steps out again, or a marketing or a comms specialist or something like that if you're working in a project group. So all of these different ones, otherwise, though, he would say they fit into either thinking, action, or social. And so they have these different roles. Now, when I thought about this, I thought if I were to simplify this, if I was setting up a project, which ones would I want to use when? And there are free resources. If you don't understand what all of they are, I'll mention them very briefly as to what each of these are, and then you can Google it. In actual fact, Caitlin, can you drop in the Change Superhero link? I do have a link which describes these in more detail if you wanted to download them. We have a free set of resources that align with the book that I wrote on how to be a change superhero. So you can download those. So if you wanted something like that, Caitlin will drop it in the chat and you'd be able to sign up and get the Belbin piece. But what I was thinking about is if I was building a change team or any project team, you want the right people at the beginning, middle and end of the project. So the coordinator role, the person who has a coordinator role, I'll briefly describe them so you can think whether that's you or not. If you're a coordinator, if you're good at pulling people together, at organising others, you naturally sort of say, so what are we trying to achieve here? You're quite collaborative. You use the word we, you bring people together, but you also have almost a balanced focus on both people and task. So that's a coordinator. It's quite useful. They used to call it chairperson or chairman. Resource investigator, this person is the real people person. They are good fun. They are great at getting people engaged. So if you need to drum up new business or go out and talk to people about the need for a new project, engage people, bring people in. They're very people and resource investigators, and they are resourceful. So they'll come up, they're very problem solving. The disadvantage of a resource investigator is that they get bored easily. So you want them at the start of a project, but you don't want to expect them to be at the end of the project. And I would say that it's quite rare to have someone who has a resource investigator preference and a completer finisher preference in the same person. I couldn't guarantee it, but anecdotally, I would say that that's quite unusual. Then the shaper is the kind of typical leader, but they are more about task than person. And it's interesting because often if you're working in a team, the person is saying, well, come on, then hurry up. They bring a sense of urgency, which is really good. They will help you drive towards deadlines. The downside of someone with a shaper personality is, particularly if they are the overall leader, is that they can be a bit abrasive and maybe just drive through the task without taking people with them. So a really great leadership trait, but occasionally may leave people behind. So those, if you've got all those three together, probably being coordinated by the coordinator, then that person's going to keep things all nice and calm, and give the introverts a chance to get a word in edgeways, keep the shaper in check, allow the resource investigator off. If you have someone taking that coordinator role, then it will work well in terms of getting things started. Now, then in the middle of the project, I've mentioned plant. You could put the plant at the start as well. Plant is a strange name. The plant is basically the creative person. It's the ideas person. Sometimes they're seen as being introverted. So they come up with amazing problem solving if they're given a chance to get the word in edgeways. So I would see that once you've got things started, you might start to identify areas where things are blocked. So you might need to come up with creative solutions, use your plant in that circumstance. On the other hand, you may just need someone who will get their head down and do it. The implementer is the workhorse. Give them the project, agree the deadlines, and they will go on and drive it through to completion. And quite often you can have so many cooks, resource investigators, shapers, all making lots of noise, not enough implementers or completer finishers in a project, which can be quite a pain. So think about that, the plant, the implementer, and then finally in the middle of the project, it's the team worker. So it's the person who is, they're very people oriented. They're the person who will arrange the social event. They are the person who will, they're the person who'll make the tea, they'll arrange for refreshments. It's that kind of person who, and if there's conflict, that they will be really good at just bringing people together, smoothing things over. So someone who's a team worker, they're great to have on the team. They really can deal with some of the personality issues, but you wouldn't want them to be in charge of leading it, because they would potentially, unless it's someone who's coordinator and team worker, you'd need to make sure they've got their coordinator hat on to drive things through. And then towards the end, you've got your monitor evaluator and completer finisher. So monitor evaluators are brilliant at just making sure things are right. So people, you resource investigators by the end of a project are bored. The shaper is just focused on the deadline. Monitor evaluator keeps an eye on quality. And actually, ideally, you'd involve them throughout, so they make sure that you're dotting the I's and crossing the T's. And the good old completer finisher also works hand in hand with someone there, and they have that real eye on deadlines and just closing things down adequately and not letting things tail off. So wrapping things up in a really strong conclusion. So obviously different people have different hats. If you were to do something like Belbin, it's helping people to be aware that those different hats might be useful at different stages in the project, and making sure that they feel comfortable to bring them out. Because thinking, what do we need at this stage in the project? Do we need ideas, or do we need to focus on deadlines, or do we need to bring in other people's, to make sure that we've got an eye on quality? So that's where I think if you ever did decide to do Belbin, and you can look into it, whether you do reports on it or otherwise, that's where I think it's quite useful. And again, it's about appreciating that we are all different, and our differences may well help us later on at any stage in a project. Thank you, Caitlin. So Caitlin's just put the URL if you wanted to download the Change Superhero toolkit. So then another classic team building model, I'm sure lots of you have seen this, so this might be a refresher for many of you, is good old Tuckman. Again, team building, all these things have been around for quite a long time, but it's still really relevant if you're building a team. So Tuckman talked about us going through 4 stages of team development. So he says that when we get together as a team, you're put into a work group, for example, you're forming, and in a moment I'll explain sort of the way that feels. So you go into a new group, you don't quite know anybody, you're a little bit shy, perhaps don't know what you're there to achieve. So it's very early on. The next stage of team development Tuckman talks about is called storming. Now, this is a critical stage because this is where we start to identify that we're not all the same. It's about having an appreciation for different views, values, differences. And if we go through the storming, and only if we go through the storming effectively, we come to identify what I bring to the party, what you bring to the party, how we can all work together effectively, and then we get into a norming stage. Now, the reality is we are not performing as a team when we're informing. We're not performing really when we're storming, and we're only just starting to perform when we get to norming. So norming is where we work out, actually, that's what you do well, this is what I do well, and then we work through that and we get to performing. So forming, storming, norming, performing is easy to say. The reason I think this is still such a relevant model is that quite often the storming phase is where people get scared. And too many teams that I've worked with have never gone through the storming phase. And what that means is they've never really reached optimum performance because they haven't been brave enough, or maybe they haven't had a coordinator or a team leader who has helped them drive through that stage to get to know each other, to really norm, to work out what their differences are by norming and saying, working out what each of their roles are in order to perform. And of course, the other challenge you've got is you go from performing, you can then go down to reforming because you lose somebody, you'll have a shake-up, there's a restructure. We all know that happens quite regularly, doesn't it? So I'm assuming that a number of you are in teams yourselves. If you are, where would you put your team? Tell me that in the chat. And maybe you're in different teams and it varies a little bit. I'll keep going while you have a chance to put that in the chat. There. Oh, lucky you, Allegiant. We've got the first two up there with performing, so they're happy in there. So this is what you would do if you were managing or you're part of a team. Even if you're part of a team not leading it, you could share this sort of information with your team colleagues and say, this is what we should be focusing on at the different stages. And actually, by sharing this sort of model with people, it can take away the fear that people sometimes have, is that when we don't see eye to eye with others, you can think that it's bad. But actually, if you can change that paradigm and say that if we are not seeing eye to eye or we're seeing things differently, then actually we're doing the right thing. Like, it's almost that conflict is positive. Lots of people see conflict as negative, but in terms of team building, a bit of healthy conflict is actually positive, because it means that you're, as Jem is going, you're on that road from storming to norming. And the thing to be aware of is that if you don't go through that, then you could just end up working below the line. So you form a team, you need to encourage people to get to know each other. And that's where I think if you were responsible for that, then not a bad idea to use a personality tool of some description, however simple, simply just to allow people to have a common language. If you use one of the ones with colours, it can work quite well, because you go, oh, that's a red comment, blue comment, whatever, people feel quite safe with that. Use something that's not too complicated, because then it helps people have a hook in terms of recognizing how they differ from each other, and that's okay, because any difference is going to have an advantage. You know, there are advantages and disadvantages to our natural behaviors, and the key is about playing to our strengths as a team. Trying to, in terms of with the nod to inclusivity, if you've got certain people who've worked together on teams before, or almost seem like a bit of a clique, they actually know how to, that they sort of always sit next to us or work together, I would really try and break that up and get people to mix with other people, so you don't have people sitting outside. Thanks, Jen. The thinking hats is another model there. Absolutely. That's where you do use that, maybe that's something to use during a team, maybe as a challenge. That's a good way of looking at challenges, the thinking hats. The other thing you could look at is, depending on how long your team's going to be together, so if it's a long-term team as opposed to a simple project team, you might want to talk about, so what are our roles and responsibilities, what's our charter, what are we here to achieve, and set goals as a team. So all of that piece of getting to know each other, setting goals and maybe charter in terms of behaviours are really useful ways of forming. And then as you move through that, it allows you to move into storming, and you may, depending on the personalities, if you've got a team with lots and lots of team workers, people-oriented people, there may not be too much storming, although the danger of that is that there can be covert storming. So conflict some personalities are very comfortable with conflict, and they will say, I don't agree with that. And that's just the way they are. And other personalities might feel really uncomfortable with that. Neither's right or wrong, but what we need to do is encourage all sorts of people to be open, to be in a position where they feel that they can say what they think, they can share ideas, and they trust that they are a valid member of the team. And that's where, if you're moving into norming, I think it's very important to make sure you are establishing this inclusive culture. So it might be about, I don't know, the time at which you have your team meetings so that everybody can participate, or the location, or it might be the language or the terminology. Being really careful now, linking into the diversity and inclusion piece, because I've been doing quite a lot on that this month. I'm really interested in things, if you're aware of microaggressions or banter. Some teams that you see in organizations that have actually become dysfunctional have some sort of banter or short-term language, which they don't mean it to be exclusive, but in actual fact it has the effect of being so. So trying to make sure that people are aware of the terminology they use, pre-existing groups, so that we are inclusive and that you're able to bring other people in, and you're actively encouraging people to feel part of something. If you've got a new team member, does everybody talk and go quiet when they come in, or does someone come up and say, oh, let me show you where you are? Do you take responsibility for including other people and making sure that you're working together? Also, part of norming is about allowing people to make mistakes, allowing people to learn and grow, not having a blame culture, and to build on your goals and milestones. And then once you get to performing, actually everyone tends to operate almost seamlessly. It's quite quiet, but you can delegate key tasks. You might be able to go, oh, you're brilliant at that. Can you run with that project? You can capitalize on people's strengths. And you may want to start thinking about people who would be good successors if people are leaving the group, so that you're not stuck with the reforming and having to go back to square one. So hopefully those are useful things to think about as you go through something. And again, whether you're leading a team or if you wanted to hand this to somebody to lead a team, but also make sure that the culture that they're developing is inclusive in all senses of the word, then you're going to build a stronger team. And this leads into Lencioni's 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, which is quite an interesting book. And he identified that teams that are dysfunctional fall down in one of these 5 areas, and these areas build on each other. So the bottom line is, it starts completely with trust. So if there isn't trust in your team, then people, well, they can't perform, or they won't necessarily, if they don't trust, they don't feel safe to make mistakes, they don't feel safe to be them. And therefore they're going to have fear of conflict. They're never going to go to the next level because they don't want to share their views or opinions and have constructive debate, which means that you might overlook issues that someone could have raised, and problems might arise that could have been prevented. So we have to have this set of trust, and that's where, if you think about that forming stage, if we are allowing people to get to know each other as individuals, you establish a culture where it's okay to be vulnerable without fear of repercussions, then people are much more likely to feel safe, whatever their personality, to challenge and engage in constructive debate. If you do that, you challenge, you have constructive debate, you have overt conflict, I'm not talking about fisticuffs, but people are able to challenge each other, then everyone is much more likely to buy into whatever it is that you go forwards with. So if, for example, I didn't agree with a particular plan of attack, but I'm able to make my point, I'm heard, we have a constructive debate about it, but we agree that actually a different route is better, then I'm much more likely to buy in. If I don't feel heard, if I don't feel that we've had a debate, if I feel that I've been railroaded and told we've just got to do it that way, then that's what happens, where people sort of quit and stay. I'm not going to take responsibility. I'm not going to buy into it. So you don't get the buy-in if we don't allow that constructive debate. And people won't have constructive debate if they don't feel safe to say what they really think. So once we get buy-in, then everybody has to take accountability. That's about deadlines. That's about meeting those commitments. And then finally, that's when you get those results, because it's about focus on collective outcomes, which goes all the way down here. So if you were to think of a team where, I'm assuming that I'm not the only one who's been in teams where it's fallen down, I was interested, where would you say teams that you've maybe been involved in have fallen down? If you were to look at teams that perhaps have been less functional, where do you think the highest risk is in your experience? Oh, sorry about that typo, we've got lack of commitment. Any there? Half of you have had a chance to contribute. Okay, 3 seconds. Anyone else want to contribute? 70%. 3, 2, 1. There we go. So it's pretty even. You would see it as pretty even here, but absence of trust being the starting point. And I think I would definitely say it is where we think people are not taking accountability. That's what you generally would hear when you say, oh, there's no accountability or commitment. There are things that cause that. Perhaps where there's maybe not sponsorship or something, or where people, but ultimately people haven't got buy-in because they haven't felt part of something. They haven't really got involved from the start of it. And so I think the key about this, though, is you really does need to start at the bottom and build up. So if you find that people are not taking accountability, then the likelihood is that maybe they're not even being challenged on it. No one's actually calling them out and saying, well, why haven't we done this? What's happened? And therefore, and the trust or the commitment isn't getting there in the first place. It's almost you need to go a level down in order to go there. So if we're not taking accountability, why aren't people committed? If they are not buying in, why are they not buying in? Is it because they didn't have a chance to be heard and have their say? And if they didn't have a chance to have their say, is it because they didn't want to, or they felt there was conflict that they were uncomfortable with, or they didn't feel safe to share what they really thought? So you see how you can go back down it and you can unpick the cause of the problem is probably from the bottom, and ultimately the result is the output. Interesting, Adam said here, an old MD of mine told us all to read the book, then completely ignored the lessons of it. Yeah, it's easy to do that, isn't it? Oops. Okay, so on to my final slide. So if you want to help teams that you're working with avoid dysfunction, then help people realize that they're all part of it. Everyone has a part to play. We need to focus on collective outcomes, and it's about getting buy-in to it. It's really important to make sure that difficult issues are confronted. So that would have, we have zero tolerance to cliques or microaggressions or, excluding people. And also, I would say encourage people to open up if they're being sort of covertly anti something. Conflict doesn't have to be overt. Sometimes people can be passive aggressive or eye rolling, and you need to actually get that out as well, because they're not going to buy in if they haven't been open and felt involved. We need to make vulnerability safe. People will only buy in if they feel that they're not going to be made a fool of, or they'll be safe in it. Helps a lot if people are self-aware. Hence, if you start with some sort of personality tool, whichever you like, then I think self-aware communication makes a big difference, and people being prepared to be flexible and recognize that their style is not the only style. Really important to encourage people to have their say. It's drive through, and the extroverts might dominate the viewpoints. So it's really important to make sure that those people, the others that have that chance to have their say, in order to make sure that everyone feels committed to things. Make sure that we've got accountability through people taking personal responsibility, asking people what they're accountable for, what's your deadline, what's your responsibility, what have you signed up for? And also help the team to schedule time in to reflect, learn and grow together. Teams they're not made overnight, and sometimes we get things wrong. So having that almost self-awareness, not just of individuals, but us as a team, how effective were we as a team? What could we do differently? Is a really powerful way of helping people to learn and grow together. Okay, so hopefully there were some suggestions there that might be useful to you. Let me know if this is something, whether you're just here, I don't know, maybe you're here for your own information or something that you can put into practice. Is there something else that you suggest that makes a big difference in building diverse and effective teams? Feel free to chat us and put that in the chat. And also, if you've got any questions that you'd like me to address personally, more than happy to do that. I'll stay on or answer any questions. So let us know in the chat what you think, and anything that you think about this topic, any questions that you have. Just while you do that, I'll just run through what's coming next. So well-being is our topic for October. It seems to be a hot topic again. It continues to be a hot topic. And then managing difficult performance issues in November. So both those webinars are up on the website. Caitlin will send out the links to you on the email, and we will send you out the slides if you want them. And that's when the training courses are starting. So we've got Change Superhero and Virtual Manager. Thank you for joining, everybody. If any of you are interested in our Actus Academy offer or want to know more of that, in fact, I'll pop this up in case people have got to dash off and want to do that. We have got free content, a brand new content on the Actus Academy. So if you want to know any more about this, we've got a free wellbeing and resilience contact. If you book either Actus Academy for your in-house e-learning or you want the Academy, if you want to know more about it, it's hard to describe here, then just let us know on the poll if you'd like to know more about that. And we'll follow up. And also, if any of you want to work with me on Virtual Change Superhero, that course is in November. We've just put those live. So I run that session, that particular course personally. And then here's all the other links. So we'll obviously send those out to you. Here's my contact details. Do link in with me if otherwise. And also, we're just starting our new financial year. So I've got a bit of sight in the diary, but it's starting to get busy for autumn. But we do a range of training, and we also work in-house with organisations. So if there's anything like that where you want to talk about things that you're doing internally, you've got some internal challenges, feel free, just let us know and I'll follow up. Yeah, more than happy to have that conversation. If you don't already know about it, we do have a LinkedIn group, which is called the HR Uprising LinkedIn group, and we tend to post things there first. Raging activist, Elaine. Yeah, raging activist, totally, that's not changed. We do put stuff there first. We're doing things like there's a coffee club happening that's fully booked this month. The idea of that is it's a sort of collaboration and networking space, but that's the first place we post that. So just trying to put things out there that might be useful to people. Great, I can't see any questions, but thank you so much for joining, everyone. As I say, the content will come out to you. Do pop in the poll here if you want any follow up on any of these things, and we'll get in touch and explain more about what things are about, or contact me directly. My email's here as well, so just ping me an email if you've got a specific question. Okay, I think I'll stop there because I can't see any others, but lovely. Jem, where's GFS? What's GFS stand for? Because I want to keep going G4S. I used to write that GFS. What does it stand for? Thank you, John. It was nice to have you. It was nice to see someone with their camera on, actually, so I appreciated that. So it's nice to see a real person's face there. Okay, I will stop this now, I think.